Hello and welcome back to International School History Teacher and this series of lessons about the rise to power and rule of authoritarian states. In this lesson we'll begin to look at how the authoritarian state reinforces, extends and maintains its newly acquired power. How does the state control the individual? Well, as we've seen in a previous lesson, the state uses a mixture of coercion, persuasion and consent. Today we're going to focus on coercion, the state's formal social control of the individual through the use of force and legal methods. Legal methods are very important during the process of authoritarian consolidation. This isn't about the use of brute force, but rather the slightly more subtle changes that are made to laws, institutions, and to personnel. As Walter Ulbricht, the post-war leader of East Germany, explained to his Communist Party colleagues,
and gradually take over the whole situation, but not at once. We should already prepare for building up the police. The man for personnel, who changes personnel. The man for education. So we were flabbergasted. We only 3 or 4 comrades and everybody else are social democrats and bourgeois democrats and so on. So one of us asked and said, it must look democratic, but we must have everything in our hands.
the first thing a newly authoritarian state does is change the laws. New laws might be imposed by decree or through declaring emergency martial law, but the goal is the same. The fundamental human rights central to liberal democracy are gradually weakened. The right to express political opinions might be limited or the right to privacy curtailed. These laws are often justified as the temporary measures that are introduced in time of crisis.
I declare before all Italy that I assume full responsibility for what has happened. Italy wants peace and quiet and to get on with its work. I shall give it all these, if possible in love, but if necessary by force. In the 48 hours after my speech, the whole situation will be changed.
The January 1925 speech is the revelatory moment when fascism embarks upon the path towards dictatorship and the totalitarian state. He does it through a series of laws which eliminate the opposition deputies from parliament, which increasingly censors the press, which ultimately in 1926 leads to the dissolution of non-fascist parties and non-fascist trade unions, to the structures being put into place of a police state and a one-party state.
But it is the erosion of the rule of law that is most significant in the authoritarian state. The individual might be arrested and held for an indefinite period of time without access to a lawyer and without the right to a fair trial. In prison, they might be denied basic rights and subject to physical and psychological abuse and even torture. In this way, vocal critics, those capable of influencing others, are silenced and potential opposition is stifled.
Ich wurde ja dann in den Bunker eingeliefert und angekettet. Da brachte er einen Teller, da lagen Weißwürste drauf und Brettchen. Und da sagte er, das wäre eine schöne, das hat er mir so hingehalten, das wäre eine schöne Henkersmahlzeit für dich. Aber selbst die bist du nicht wert, du Schurke. Wir wissen von dir sehr viel, wir wissen, dass du in Prag gewesen bist und so weiter. Wir werden schon noch fertig mit dir. Und dann hat er mir das nochmal so rüber, weg, zugeklappt und war schneller wieder fort, war nichts zu essen. Und dann kam er noch einmal mit einem Strick und hat mir zeigen wollen, wie man sich am besten aufhängt.
Over time, how law is made also changes. In a dictatorship, there is no real separation between the powers of the executive and the legislature, nor is there an independent judiciary which can strike down legislation as unconstitutional. In addition, new institutions are created to make it even easier for the authoritarian state to govern. The process of consolidation varies from state to state, but in general terms, authoritarian consolidation means gradually replacing the power of existing state institutions with newly created authoritarian institutions. In communist states, the traditional institutions and sources of power, presidents, prime ministers and parliaments, might continue to exist, but a new state emerges in which real power is concentrated in the Communist Party and its hierarchy. The most important figure in a communist state is the General Secretary of the Communist Party, not a president or a prime minister. The classic analysis of this dual state was provided by Ernst Fraenkel in his Concepts of Normative and Prerogative State, in which he analysed how power was consolidated by Hitler in Nazi Germany. And Fraenkel distinguished between the normative state that the Nazis inherited within ministries and civil service, local authorities, laws and conventions, and the prerogative state, a new system that derived its legitimacy entirely from the will of Hitler and his acolytes. For example, when Hitler failed to get the convictions he wanted at the Reichstag fire trial, he ordered the creation of people's courts, which had jurisdiction over a wide range of political offences and a tendency to punish much more severely.
The principal procedure governing German law during the Third Reich was something called the Führerprinzip. And the idea was that Hitler had absolute discretion to make any ruling whatsoever in the interests of the state, and that there were lesser or subordinate Führers who also followed the Führerprinzip and themselves had wide discretion, limited only by what the Führer above them had told them to do.
Early in their subversion of law, Nazi officials established special courts to deal with anyone the party deemed an enemy of the Reich. In these courts, there was no pretrial investigation. Judges determined arbitrarily what evidence to consider, and there was no right of appeal. Once he succeeded in concentrating legal authority into his own hands, Hitler then had the tools for eliminating all those he deemed to be enemies of the Reich.
The traditional courts continued to do their job, just as you would expect in the normative state. But the people's courts politicised the judiciary, and that was the prerogative state. As well as changing the laws and the institutions that exercise power, the final legal method employed by authoritarian states concerns the appointment of those people who will run those institutions. Controlling who can exercise authority allows the state to reward loyalty and punish dissent. Individuals are not appointed or promoted because of their ability alone, but because of their personal or ideological suitability. Once these suitable individuals are appointed, they have a significant vested interest in supporting the regime. Appointing sympathetic judges, police commissioners and senior civil servants will help reinforce the political and ideological prejudices of the regime, and those powerful individuals will in turn appoint other individuals who resemble them. For the ambitious citizen looking to get on, being appointed, being promoted and exercising power means looking and sounding like those in power. Patronage and nepotism therefore become a means not only of consolidating authoritarian rule, it also becomes essential to its long-term maintenance of power. When we think of the coercive power of the state, it is the brute coercive force of the state that comes to mind. In this section, I'd like to look at three distinctive examples of that power: the secret police, the surveillance network, and the political prisons. The term secret police or political police refers to police agencies that are involved in covert actions against political enemies of the state. The Gestapo, KGB and Stasi are names that have attained an emblematic notoriety of authoritarianism and are obvious examples of the prerogative power of the state. The secret police is literally a law unto itself. Real or imagined opponents can be abducted, preventative arrest as it's called, indefinitely detained, tortured, murdered even, without real crimes ever having been committed, and certainly without any due legal process being followed. Why is privacy so important? Privacy is essential to freedom. If you know you are being watched, you modify your behavior. If you modify your behavior, you are not acting freely. If your acts are not free, you are under control. I know what I was doing a year ago because my Twitter account and Facebook reminded me.
Every mail you type, every card you swipe, they'll be watching you.
When I walk down the street or when I go to a bank, the CCTV camera records my every move. Every purchase I make, every step that I take, every cake that I bake, they'll be watching me. Privacy is not the same thing as secrecy. Secrecy implies having something to hide, whereas privacy is about the right to be alone, unobserved, anonymous. But in an authoritarian state, privacy and secrecy are treated the same way. Although the secret police of the prerogative state might be responsible for organizing or collating private information on individuals, the authoritarian state also relies extensively on the willingness of citizens to watch and report on each other.
Since March 1938, Ilza Soniatowska is a resident next door to us in a garden cottage. She rarely has visitors. Now and then, a woman of about 36 years old comes, and she is of Jewish appearance. She has always been sympathetic towards I would like to mention that Miss Totska never responds to the German greeting, Heil Hitler. To my mind, Miss Totska is behaving suspiciously.
Und neben uns in einem Gartenhaus eine Ilse Sonja Totzke. Ja. Die genannte ist mir aufgefallen, weil sie einen jüdischen Einschlag hat.
Das ist ja ein Mist. Das ist ja ein Mist.
Das stimmt alles gar
Nein,
nicht.
das stimmt nicht.
Also ich lese mal kurz zu Ende.
Ja, natürlich.
Das Verhalten der Totzke ist mir auffällig und ich habe angenommen, dass sie sich vielleicht irgendwie zum Nachteile des Deutschen Reiches betätigen könnte. Ich mache deshalb bei der Geheimen Staatspolizei diese Mitteilung. Weitere sachdienliche Angaben kann ich nicht machen. Nach Selbstlesen unterschrieben,
Also das ist
Kraus.
hier Resi Kraus. Ja,
Ja.
Das ist mein Name.
Und ist das denn Ihre Unterschrift?
Das ist meine Unterschrift.
So when we think of punishment in authoritarian regimes, we think of concentration camps in Germany, the Gulag of the Soviet Union, the Chinese Laogai. And yet authoritarian regimes do not necessarily punish their citizens more than democracies do. In 2016, nearly 2.2 million adults were held in US prisons, which is approximately 655 for every 100,000 people. At the same time, in authoritarian Russia, the figure was actually considerably less, at around 432 prisoners per 100,000. But what makes authoritarian punishment different is not how many are being punished, but rather who is punished and how they're being punished. Now, as we've seen previously, people can be punished in authoritarian regimes without having broken any normative laws. The existence of political prisoners, those who have been identified as a threat to the state, are a distinctive feature of authoritarian regimes.
The first to be imprisoned in this revolution were the Nazis' political opponents, communists and socialists, who were rounded up and thrown into hastily built concentration camps. Hermann Goering boasted that scores were being settled, all in an atmosphere of chaotic terror, as one Nazi stormtrooper admitted.
Everyone is arresting everyone else, avoiding the prescribed official channels. Everyone is threatening everyone else with protective custody. Everyone is threatening everyone else with Dachau. Every little street cleaner today feels he is responsible for matters which he has never understood.
In a democracy, the punished enjoy basic human rights. They broadly are treated humanely. This is certainly not the case in most authoritarian states where forced hard labour, humiliation, corporal punishment and even torture can become everyday experiences. So in conclusion, the state controls the individual through a mixture of coercion, persuasion, and through generating consent. In this lesson, we focused on the power of coercion, or formal social control. Formal social control can be divided into the legal coercion of new laws, institutions, and people, and the coercive force of a secret police, surveillance, and prisons. In the next lesson, we'll move on to look at informal social control in the world of influence, socialization, propaganda, and manipulation. More next time.
Architecture of amnesia, scare the people with hysteria. Architecture